Well, good morning, and welcome to Kirklees Town Hall here in Huddersfield. Thank you very much, Andrew, for coming along and giving me your time this morning. It's very much appreciated. I'm sure you've read some of the background into what the Democracy Commission's work is about. My name is Dr. Andy Mycock from the University of Sheffield, your former employer before my time. I think that in this period of considerable change, that I think Kirklees Council should be commended for setting up the Democracy Commission. It's not something which central government seems to have considered in terms of the fact that there is quite a seismic change in the constitutional architecture, not just the United Kingdom, but the way in which England's being governed. And yet the implications for local government, and particularly for local democracy, seem to be almost entirely overlooked. And I think in that sense that when you take in the context of what's happened this summer with the European Union referendum and its impact on society, I think that this is both timely in its setting up and its establishment, and also in its remit. And your own connections with Kirklees Council are extremely strong over a long period of time.
Absolutely, 1999.
I think both as a local citizen, but also I think in that sense in which the university and the council have very strong links. It's been very pleasing to build on your own legacy and that of Brendan as well in building those links. As you may well know, the Commission has been taking evidence since the end of July. We've held some public consultations across various parts of the council. We've also taken evidence from various stakeholders and will continue to do that over the next month. We've also been commissioning some polling and engaging with citizens in various other ways. And the work itself will go forward, and a report will be written up over October, November, and we hope to feed back sometime in December or January back to the council. One of the things that we're very keen to establish is that anyone that is kind enough to give their time to engage with us, that they are part of an ongoing conversation. And so one of the things that I've noted when I've been involved in these kind of commissions is often that we engage with people, but then rarely go back and return to them and ask their opinion on our conclusions. We intend to ensure that that happens, and we hope that you all will be kind enough after today to consider feeding back to us on that. Particularly, you've been invited today obviously because of your work with the Members' Allowances Independent Review Panel, but also your wider engagement with the way in which the council, the role of the council has changed. It's interesting, we all start off our mornings listening to the news and listening to Radio 4 this morning at the Labour conference. It's fascinating to see this tension between the PLP and the expanding membership. Sort of raises a fundamental question which correlates over to what I think is one of the fundamental questions of the Democracy Commission, which is this tension between representative and participatory democracy. And in many ways, a lot of the work that we've been doing continues to raise this sense in which citizens both want their councillors to represent them, and at the same time they feel like they're being asked and they want to participate more in their own communities and defining what happens in those communities. I wonder whether you'd just like to start off by saying a few words about how you understand those tensions between representative and participatory forms of democracy, and what are the tensions and opportunities in those sense?
Well, I think in terms of modern governance, that tension between representative and participatory democracy is absolutely fundamental. Because in one sense, what representative democracy is asking elected representatives to do is to speak for and act on behalf of communities. And then that means that the primary accountability mechanism is you get re-elected next time or you don't. Clearly the representative idea of democracy is much thicker, it's much richer. And I don't think that it's a style of democracy that the British political culture has been very good at handling or even recognising. And you can see that in the row over whether or not you should have things like referenda, which are clearly antithetical to representative democracy. Those representatives are supposed to take the decision. If you don't like it, you vote them out. So in that sense, I think there's a very powerful tension between representative and participatory democracy. And if you're asking the question, what's the solution to that? I think the answer is that there isn't one. And that would lead me to conclude that any sort of the future shape of democracy is going to be much messier, and it's going to be much less clean than it was in the past, when you could, for example, with MPs and councillors, clearly identify a set of roles and say, well, that's what they do. I think the way I would try and capture this is this idea that what we've seen over the past 20 years is a shift from government to governance, and a shift from a situation where representatives row. They set the direction and pull on the oars, and that's the direction that government moves in. A shift from rowing to steering. And I think that's a big change to ask councillors and indeed MPs to recognise now that the role of the representative is going to change fundamentally. And I think the idea of moving from steering to rowing, the government's job is now not to govern, it's to engage in governance, the creation of networks, partnerships, in which elected representatives are an important element, but only one element, which leads to a much more complicated process of governing.
It does indeed, and I think one of the issues there is this notion of councillors adopting a more managerialist approach in the way in which they function.
Yeah.
What kind of issues do you see raised by that shift?
Well, I think an important one, and it's one that we've sort of run up against in the independent review panel, which is that if you see your councillors as representatives who you are charging to take decisions, that requires that they are resourced and supported. And of course, one of the big changes in recent years is that the central resource backing up councillors, if you like, officer support, it is shrinking. Not just because of financial cuts, the whole austerity agenda, but also because of the change in the nature of what local authorities are being asked to do. In the sense that local authorities are no longer given policies and said, okay, get on with that, do it. It's about organising those policies with bodies external, the health service, the police, and so on and so forth, which immediately creates, as I say, a much more complicated process, and it puts elected councillors in a very complicated position. Are they representatives, or are they change makers? Are they there to construct networks? And I think that's a difficult task. And coincidentally, I think it's a very difficult one to communicate publicly.
Yeah, that certainly seems to come out in much of our engagement with the public, is that not only are they unclear about what is the role of the councillor, but if they do have a sense about what it is very much this notion of it being a representative position rather than it being more participatory.
Yeah.
Do you see in some ways then that there is a contradiction at the heart of central government in this notion in which there is a desire to pass power down, to devolve or to decentralise, and at the same time that the ability for local government to develop the kind of civil service architecture that you discussed, to become a more proactive policy-making unit, is also being constrained by austerity, whatever we want to call it, by cutbacks in local government funding.
Yeah, I mean, from a central government point of view, I mean, you can see this across a whole different range of political systems. The idea that you can hive off functions from centre to periphery, to local, to whatever, is a very attractive one. The issue is not so much the hiving off. I mean, I think everyone involved in this commission, I think, would agree that the best level at which any decision should be taken is the closest one to the people who are affected by it. So I don't think that's the debate. I think the debate is whether or not the resources are made available or exist or can be created to allow those decentralised, that subsidiarity function to carry on. Now, of course, the other problem with this is that it relates, sorry, a bit of jargon here from the trade, to this idea of the depoliticisation thesis, which is that government is keen to get rid of these functions because they cause them a lot of trouble. Therefore, it's much better to push them off on someone else. Now, if okay, you're pushing social health care onto local authorities, which in a sense is a good thing because they're closer to the populations, but you're not resourcing it, then the blame for that, for service failures, it's going to apply to the local authorities, it's going to apply to councillors, it's going to apply to those who are running the system. And of course, councillors are the most visible element in this. I do this for a living, and I'm not sure how I would go about complaining to my health authority. But I sure as hell know how to complain to the local authority, because I get, a circular from the councillor with his number on, and I can easily find him or her. So, I think in that sense, what you also see is councillors put in a very difficult position, in that they are responsible for things, in a sense that they are unable to have much effect over in terms of implementation, because they're reliant on other organisations for implementation, health, and the resources that they have to play with are in short supply. So I think that adds to the difficulty and the complexity that a councillor and a council will find itself in, and they can no longer fall back on well-resourced officer help to come up with solutions.
Interesting. There has been some suggestion from some of our evidence givers that one of the potential issues here is that Whitehall itself is reluctant to devolve the civil service down to whatever local level or combined level.
Yes.
Do you think that is a potential problem?
And I think you can identify something of a parallel with that. Actually, say in Kirklees, pursuing the analogy, what's the point in having lots of people in Kirklees sat in the centre of Huddersfield when the game, if you like, is out is geographically devolved? In other words, you don't need, in a sense, large concentrations of offices in the centre of Huddersfield. What they should be doing is either out working with councillors, in other words, multitasking teams out in the district, or there should be better connections and communication between councillors and the officer support. Now, in a sense, it's a really interesting question, because once you start getting involved in questions of devolution, then you're talking about it's essentially questions of power. And once you get into questions of power, then you're at the nub of the entire issue. But you see, we have, if you like, the physical structure of local government reflects the old model of rowing. Central bureaucracies doing things. And I'm not using bureaucracies in any pejorative way at all, but central organisations doing things. And the whole thrust of what I've been talking about, and the way in which governance has been evolving, is the argument that, well, you don't actually need these anymore. You don't need these central bureaucracies, and in fact they become an obstacle. What you should be looking to do, and this is the parallel with central government, is devolving this out. Get it down to where the service is delivered. But of course, that's a question of power.
It's a sort of, there's a disjuncture here between the reform of the political structure, representative structures, and the wider structure of local
Yes,
and
I think
central
so.
government.
And I think it comes back, in some ways, to that tension, which I think is irreconcilable between representative and participatory democracy.
Thank you, that's enormously helpful. Councillor?
I really do agree with what you were saying there, particularly when we're looking at how the roles are changing with councillors. I think it's quite hard for some people to accept that change, and also for that, we were discussing this yesterday in an evidence session, where actually members of the public are perhaps asked to do the jobs that they feel councillors are elected to do. But I was only elected last year, so this model of new council and this way of working has become, that's my norm. But as we were saying again yesterday, there's a lot of councillors that are maybe in their third or fourth term, that there's quite a seismic change there. It's engagement with the public as well is a massive, I think, disparity across sections of the community and also across different wards. You may have councillors that are more visible in certain wards, or also councillors that are only reaching certain pockets of the community. A lot of councillors do actually work, so they may be more available in the evenings and aren't seen by people in the daytime. But a lot of that is down to public trust, and that's a massive question of actually how you actually build public trust in councillors and what we're actually doing. So I think a lot of people, myself included when I was first elected, don't actually realise the complexity of the role and the different dimensions within that and the different sections that you deal with. I think sometimes there's this view as well that the council is a bit of a talking shop. I've mentioned to residents about various committees or groups we're in, you can always see an eye roll. I think they do think a lot of the committees are just talking shops without actually realising how central they are to the decision-making policy.
I think that's right, and I think there are two parts to that. One is how do you improve the sort of the public image of councillors and politicians in general? Well, I think, in a sense, the answer to that is you don't. You're on a hiding to nothing if you try, because if you say you're being very unfair to councillors or MPs or whatever, the response is, well, nobody made them do it. So I think in that sense, changing how councils are perceived and councillors are perceived is a very, very, very long-term process, and probably not realisable. So I think that's one point. The second point is, and I think it comes back to this question of, well, what do we mean? People want their councillors to be effective. Well, what do we mean by effective? By effective, what we usually mean is someone coming along and saying, well, I've got this problem, okay, I'll sort it out. I've sorted it out for you. That's effective. In this new climate, I think, and it's a very difficult idea to get over, increasingly, one measure of effectiveness is going to be to say to constituents, well, I'm sorry, I can't do that. That's just not possible in this current climate. It can't be done in that way. Now, what I suggest is you might want to work through this, I don't know, a charity or whatever, in which the council acts as a sort of an exchange mechanism, not actually doing anything, but saying, well, I can't do this. We don't have the officer support, it's just not possible. But if you work through with these people, they may be able to help. Now, that's a very different role, and it's one that, as you were suggesting, a lot of councils aren't comfortable with, and certainly it's not one that a large proportion of the public are going to be familiar with, because it's a very different way of working. We keep coming back to this word of complexity. It's a much more complex way of doing things. It's no longer a question of you as a councillor ringing an officer up and saying, I've had this complaint, sort it. Because the chances are that you ring the officer up and there's no one on the end of the line.
So this, sorry,
there's lots of really interesting stuff you said there. I mean, perhaps we could just explore that relationship between participation and representation and engagement. I mean, I'm a fourth term councillor now, and one of the things we've done is when we're using a problem solving approach is actually if you engage with the communities, there's still a decision needs to be made at the end, but you get a better decision made. And it's that. So what sort of models are there, or what existing practice are you aware of where that is already works? So
I mean, one of the most interesting models that I've come across, and I don't think it's a total replica, is the tradition of town meetings in New England.
Yeah.
New England town meetings are a very, very old established form of participatory and representative democracy. They did combine both, but they are very, very specific, and there are very specific reasons about why it works in that particular geographical region. But if you read about them, what emerges from them very, very clearly is this idea that the local community elects its councillors, but it accepts that the role of those councillors is to work with the community on a much much wider basis. Because these are town meetings, by definition they're not going to have big support mechanisms. So therefore they have to work very, very intensely with the next council, the next town meeting. They have to work very closely with local business and so on and so forth. So the New England town meeting, I think, is a model that's always been sort of regarded as a bit of a historical curio because it's so special, because it relates to it. But I think.
For example, I mean, we had problems a few years ago around antisocial behaviour around Slathwaite Station. So we had a meeting in Slathwaite Civic Hall, led by one of the local councillors. Police were there, British Transport Police Council.
Absolutely.
The opportunity for people to get things off the chest, get things off the chest, and then for the first half, and then the second half is right. What are we going to do about this? So again, better buy-in from British Transport Police who weren't engaged. Actually, friends of the station set up to actually make the place look a bit better.
I think that's
some of us are actually operating that model already. I mean, the point that Gemma made about not consistency across Kirklees. I mean, the issue then for us as councillors is obviously Slathwaite is one small community within a ward, and then we need to negotiate or talk to other colleagues about.
And I think you raise an interesting. Gemma raised an interesting point by saying, well, you have to. It's easier in some wards than others. The leafy middle class ward with a high proportion of middle class people who are likely to be widely involved in a whole range of activities.
Can't describe Slathwaite like that.
To do with social capital. The idea of community involvement in a range of ways, and there are likely to be. The area where I live, it's rich in social capital, and it's going to be much richer. I mean, I don't want to sort of name, but we can all think of wards where it will be very difficult to get people to go to a meeting about anything. And I think that is a problem, and obviously it's not something that can be allowed to persist, but in this new model. But I don't think it's something that's going to be. It's not going to be something that's going to be cured overnight. And I think you have to build up to it. You have to work hard on it, and you have to invest resources and so on and so on.
So again, I mean, just explain this role. So potentially one of the roles of a councillor is to. People want simple solutions to complex problems. And politically, that's when we get sound bites and stuff. And like so potentially one of the roles for a councillor is actually to, if there's an issue in the community, unpick some of the things that can be done, and perhaps say some things that can't be done. And actually, I think the political skill is to say, right, this is how it fits into the strategic whole.
And I think that illustration that you gave of the sort of the antisocial behaviour around, the railway station is a really good one. If you see it in terms of concentric overlapping rings, clearly there are things that you as a councillor could address, but not, for example, in terms of, well, can a police car,
No.
come by at random times? That's a resourcing issue for the police to say, well, yeah, we'd love to do that, but
But we have a good working relationship with the neighbourhood policing team,
and I think those are the three words: good working relationship. And I think if you take that idea of the good working relationship, I think that's the central element in this idea that what we're seeing is this move from rowing to steering. Essentially your role, what you're really good at as the local representative. And don't forget, the council has got one really, really important resource that neither police, nor the health service, nor anybody else has got, which is they're elected. And they can say, I'm elected by my community want this to happen. And I think that's a really important, it's a non-tangible resource. But for you to be able to go along and say, well, there's this problem at Slough Station and my constituents have asked me to ask if you would come along to a meeting, blah, blah, blah.
I'd like to explore devolution, but not necessarily what you talk about and devolving, but
move
that
on
might
to this.
come in later on.
Yeah, okay. Because I just wanted to, because what you're describing is a shift of a change to a more facilitating role.
Absolutely.
Councils are becoming facilitators rather than representatives. The New England model is interesting. I think that what you were talking about in Slaithwaite, Slough, whatever it is, is interesting itself. To what extent is party... I know I will. It's all right. I'm from the wrong side of the Pennine, so I'm allowed ignorance. To what extent is party politics an aid or in some ways, problematic in this redefined relationship described?
In the New England model, party politics is very, very low down the scale. There's a very powerful culture about it being not party political. Clearly, party politics has a much higher visibility and a much higher role in English local government. And there's to some degree historically, there's always been this sort of this unspoken desire. Well, wouldn't it be a good idea to get politics out of local government? Well, forget that. It ain't going to happen. Parties are in there. Now, I actually don't see any problem, really, with party politics. In a sense, I think party politics and partisan politics are a good thing. The clash of ideas and so on, and the free marketplace of ideas and discussion. They're fundamental to democracy, so that's okay. Equally, I don't see party politics as inhibiting the sorts of things that we've been talking about at this meeting, because I think party politicians recognise that things have to get done. And if you are in a ward, for example, where you are the only representative of that political party, it strikes me that you have two choices: either impotence or work within the system to try and achieve some sort of influence. And we can all think of examples where parties have done that. The wards in Kirklees have 3 councillors. An interesting piece of work would be to look at, are wards with councillors from one political party more effective than ones from where they come from 3, or there's a split, or there are divisions, or whatever. And I'm not sure what the outcome would be, but I think I tend to take a fairly sort of laissez-faire approach to this. I think party politics it's inevitable. I think it's good. I think from the clash of ideas, change emerges. That's how new ideas come forward. So I don't see party politics necessarily as an obstruction. It can be, but then that's That's politics.
Thank you very much for that. That's very helpful. I just want to move on slightly because just think about this role of the council.
Yeah.
One of the things that has come up in our engagement with the public has been both a lack of understanding about how council works, about how decisions are made, that whole process, and also what is the role of local councillors. So there is really a sort of knowledge gap about what is that role. And in some ways there is a sort of contradiction that there is high levels of political trust in local rather than national politicians, and yet at the same time there's far lower turnouts. I just wonder whether you have any thoughts on that. First, the problem about the lack of knowledge about it, and then that contradiction between trust and electoral engagement.
Yeah, let me link this to the work that we've done, the members' allowances in the independent review panel. One of the issues that we have had at the core of our work since we started way back in 1999 are role profiles. What does a council leader do? What does a group business manager do? What does the ordinary, I'm not using that in a disparaging way, but what does the ordinary councillor do? And of course, defining what the ordinary councillor does is the basis of the entire pyramid, because what everybody above them have got, the one thing they've got in common, irrespective of whether they're the council leader or whatever, is that they are all councillors. Now, we spent a lot of time periodically revising and recasting and rethinking these roles. And I think that's a really good way to do it, because it gives a sort of common expectation of what the councillor is expected to do, the ward councillor. And it leaves plenty of room for the individual to then develop that role, to emphasise some bits, to de-emphasise others. So I think in terms of the profiles, I think that the Kirklees has a pretty good set. I think that they're clear, they're transparent, they give a clear idea of what councillors ought to be doing. Now, how do you communicate that? Well, I think that's the $64,000 question, isn't it? Because, in a sense, what the public will look for is, going back to what we started with in a sense, is effectiveness. Does the councillor do the job? And because they're elected, a councillor can quite rightly say, well, I've been re-elected, so I must be doing the job. And that's a powerful argument, and not one that I think we need to, not one that we should disparage, because I think unless you run for the council, unless you stood for the council, shut up. If you can do better, you do it. You know what I mean? So I think that's a really powerful argument. Now, how do we get the public to recognise what councillors do? I honestly don't know. Clearly, it's not just a question of putting stuff up on the website, because it's up there. So I think it's about... what you tend to find is that people... you tend to find that the public will have a generally low opinion of its representatives, except where it knows them. All MPs, all councillors, they're all in for themselves, they're all crap, they're all rubbish. But on the other hand, mine's really good. Help me solve this problem, and so on and so forth. So I think it's about the greater familiarity with what individual councillors do in wards, and I think then that devolves down to the individual councillor and the relationship that they have with their constituents. There's no other way of doing it, and I think it's in some ways it's a personal relationship. It's it's almost not a political relationship.
Yes, it crosses that binary, doesn't it? It certainly does. And just one more question before I let our councillors back in. And it's more about your own institution, representing the University of Sheffield, of course. Sir Bernard Crick was long-standing servant there. David Blunkett is now associated with the Crick Centre. Both of them linked with citizenship education, introduction in 2002. One of the things that has come up has been the idea about citizenship education, political education, in schools of young people, explaining local government, giving it the resonance that's at least on a par with national. Do you think that's a good idea?
Well, I'm always in favour of more education. I think that's a good. I'm always a bit sceptical about formally teaching people about politics. I mean, speaking professionally, most politics teaching in schools isn't very good. Now, you may think it's not very good at universities either, but I would clearly dispute that strongly. But I think this is something that has to be learned, and I think it's something that people it has to be demonstrated to people that it's worth paying attention to this. I think in the final analysis, people aren't stupid. And if they perceive an activity that they're told is important, but that activity impinges or doesn't appear to impinge on what their day-to-day lives are like, they will say, look, this is rubbish, there's a gap here.
It's too abstract.
Why should I pay attention to this? It doesn't affect me. And I think one of the lessons that needs to be drawn from the Brexit thing is that sooner or later people will say, this isn't doing anything for me. And if you give me an opportunity, I'll put the boot in. Now, I think a lot of the result of Brexit has nothing at all to do with the European Union. Nothing at all. I think a lot of it is about popular, widespread disaffection from politics. And a lot of that feeling is, look, over the last 20 years I've seen my community change around me, I've seen my job disappear, no one's asked me about this. And what the hell? And given an opportunity, people will respond in the way that they have the tools to do. And the result is, as we can see, Brexit, Donald Trump is not a million miles away from all this. I mean, Donald Trump is actually a purer expression of this. And I think that's a very dangerous situation for us to get into. So I think what I would argue is, I think it's about, and it's a much longer term process, it's not just about saying to people, look, democracy is really good for you. I think you have to demonstrate that. And I think we have to demonstrate that. And that's then about effectiveness, and it's about local government, and indeed, national government, regional government, actually doing things for people that people recognise. They might not like them, and it might evoke a reaction, but at least they're doing things that we recognise as being of importance.
It's experiential.
I think it is experiential. I think it's experiential rather than somebody saying, this is really good for you.
Yeah, thank you. That's interesting.
We could just explore, there's a very interesting debate on the Radio 4 yesterday, post-Brexit, and actually talking about safe seats.
Yes.
Actually, for a lot of people, putting your cross on the paper makes absolutely no
difference. None at all.
Yeah.
It's even worse in the United States. Only about 5% of congressional seats are competitive.
Yeah.
So why the hell?
Yeah. And that's a really critical thing. If we're talking about, so actually, for some things, going back to what we said before, the community engagement stuff is actually more productive. If you've got a problem-solving approach and you do something about it, that's a more direct, which is very little to do with, you might just get a few more people putting across the The devolution stuff,
Yes.
which sounds really interesting, because one of the things that we've talked about, we're talking about the Leeds City region, that appears, whatever the deal's going to be plonked on top of existing local government. If looking at what's happening in North Yorkshire, that's already on top of a 2-tier or a 3-tier system. Kirklees, part parish, part not parish. What, to follow the devolution, what sort of should local government look like as a basic unit, not just in terms of council offices as well, if you're going to push that resource out to do particular things. And the subsidiarity, what needs to be taking place in, say, a village, what needs to take place in a township.
As I said earlier on, I do this for a living.
Yeah.
Okay? And I really do not get the city region. I really don't get it. And it's a mess.
Right.
It's a mess politically, it's a mess organisationally, and it's you get leaders of local authorities on local radio, making incomprehensible statements. You look at it on a map, there are great gaps in it. In that sense, when someone is confronted with that degree of mess, the natural reaction is to say, what the hell, I'm not interested.
Yeah.
And I think that's a perfectly natural reaction for anyone other than political junkies.
I'm just thinking, what would be the basic building, if you're going to build up from the bottom up, what would be the basic building block of a good local government, which would lead into a region?
Yes, yeah.
So we're looking at parishing the whole of Kirklees as a part of it, but perhaps there needs to be more. Perhaps that's your basic building block. The parish, what was be a parish or what was an urban or district rural district council in the past?
Yeah.
Have you got any views on
that's
the basic building?
Yes, I've not thought about that. Right? Parishes in Kirklees have suffered from political battles in the past.
Yeah.
They have a legacy.
Yes.
On the other hand, I think that is a good way. That is a good way to begin to build up those, sort of positive attitudes to what local government can do. Having said that, it's a long way from parish government to city region, and I just despair at the way in which the whole city region thing has been done in the last 10 years. I think it's a real opportunity that has been allowed to run into the sands of, perfectly understandable, but it's just dribbled into the sands of local political interests. Now, I know local political interests are important, but the whole point about politics is to identify, that which we have in common. And I think an opportunity has been lost. And I think the contrast, for example, with what's gone on in Manchester is really interesting. Because the reason why this has worked in Manchester, and it might sound a little bit strange from what we've been saying, but is that the whole process was effectively run and controlled by one person. It was run by one person who had a vision about where Manchester should go, and what this person did was pull all these local authorities together and to create. And to be fair, Manchester is a much more coherent entity than we are. I mean, you're never going to get Sheffield and Manchester in the same room. Sheffield and Leeds in the same room, and Leeds and Wakefield and Huddersfield and so on and so forth. But I think, having said that, I think that there are opportunities for city regional government to work. It doesn't have necessarily to be the same. We don't have to replicate Manchester. We don't have to replicate the South Yorkshire model, North Derbyshire model. And, you know, it's the old Maoist thing, you know, let 1,000 flowers bloom. Some will work, okay, great. Some won't work. If they don't work, start again.
Just going back, so I'm very interested, did you say in the last 10 years is a wasted opportunity?
Yeah.
If Manchester, Greater Manchester has worked, and obviously Howard Bernstein and Richard Lee's, tutelage, why are the problems in Yorkshire, where you see in the last 10 years there's been a missed opportunity? It's a very interesting point you raise.
I think
the lack of leadership.
I think there's a lack of leadership and a lack of vision. I think one thing that Howard Bernstein had was vision, and took a decision very, very early on that if an opportunity was offered by central government, whether it was under Tony Blair or Gordon Brown, or whether it was under David Cameron, George Osborne, they would take it. And they will go with it, and they will push it. And I don't think that degree of strategic thinking is evident in this area. And what we've seen, I think, are something more akin to medieval baronies fighting it out, rather than pursuing that. Someone come along and saying, right, this is what we want, this is what we're going to go for. And don't get me wrong, I mean, there were complaints and moans, and local authorities chanted about it in Manchester. But proof of the pudding. Proof of the pudding. And I think I do despair about the lack of strategic vision in West Yorkshire.
Do you think that identity is an issue here? Because there's a number of things that come up. One is that our respondents who engage with the public have said that Kirklees itself lacks that sort of history that gives it a sense of resonance in terms of civic identity amongst a certain generation at least. That West Yorkshire and then Yorkshire, that they have all these different tensions of identity. They don't tend to layer particularly well, do you think?
No,
whereas Greater Manchester works as a civic space.
It is interesting, that, isn't it? Yes. Yeah, Greater Manchester, I think, does work as a civic space. And I think that there are sort of fragmented identities within within those areas, which can be housed under the framework of Greater Manchester. You talk about, let's talk about something like Greater West Yorkshire. Yeah. Oh, that's Leeds, isn't it? That's Leeds. See what I mean? And this idea of a commonality, a common identity, I think is a really interesting one. I mean, where do identities come from? Where I live, people still complain about events that went on in the 1950s and this sort of thing. So I don't know. I think there's a really important issue there, and if those identities don't emerge, then in a sense you have to impose them, and that's where I think leadership comes from. That's where vision, the vision thing, it becomes important. This is where we want to be in West Yorkshire in 20 years' time, and I just find it very dispiriting to us.
So in a sense, Kirklees hasn't imposed that sense of identity on its citizens in a way that it could have done.
I don't think that after all this time there is an identity of Kirklees. I think there's a Batley one, and I think there's a Holmfirth one, and I think there's a Huddersfield one, and so on and so forth.
That's come out of a lot.
And I think that's probably replicated across this region.
I completely agree. A really close friend of mine lives in Leeds, lived in Leeds, and she would never actually identify herself as coming from a particular village. She would say Leeds. And I've never ever heard anyone, and probably speaking for both of us, where if you ask someone where they're from, or people talk about the problems in Kirklees, it's the problems in Golka, the problems in Lindley, the problems in Huddersfield. And I think that is something that probably really turns people off in the way that it just seems such a massive area of space, and a lot of it doesn't feel relevant to them. So, for example, you may live in Golka, work in Lindley, and eat out in town, So that's the areas that are important to you, and you certainly don't think of yourself as a Kirklees resident.
Yeah.
I would never describe myself as a Kirklees resident. I feel I am, but I would say I am from Lindley or Huddersfield.
Sure, but the problems of Lindley can't be solved in Lindley.
No, they can't. No, no.
And the problems in Gokhan necessarily involve what we call Kirklees, which is an administrative convenience.
I mean that's why. I mean, again, it's probably too complex. So actually, looking at basic building blocks, because having lived in the Colne Valley for most of my life, you see that tension between the valley villages. But actually, you see the things that we have in common. It's said quite a lot of situations. The things we have in common are actually greater than things that separate us. And actually, drawing on that local identity and putting it together to actually build a village. As is, I mean, I go back to the West Riding, which again has got problems of its own. But actually, that was a clear identity.
That's interesting. The point that you make is really interesting. You're right. The West Riding had an identity.
Yeah.
It
was built, communities from the Dale up from on the borders of Cumbria down to the steel foundries.
Yes, I mean, you wouldn't structure an administrative entity like the West Riding. Like you said, covered from North Yorkshire right the way down to the borders with Derbyshire. Coal, steel, engineering, farming, you name it, the lot. And yet the West Riding worked. And people still talk about Sir Alec Clegg, who was the Director of Education
talk about that for a bit.
during the post-war period, and who was a key figure in expanding education, secondary education, and so on and so forth. And he's still talked about. Now, I don't think any director of education in Huddersfield in 30 years' time will have that. So, there is that. It's not that it can't be done.
But it's more difficult. It goes back to what you were saying about more complex, more essay. Different from the Greater Manchester situation.
It's about public profile, it's about that imposition.
If councillors are potentially up for that sort of engagement, then it can. And we have seen signs within the city region about some leaders of the authorities taking, let's get over it, over those differences for the sake of it. But it still does come back to the basic building blocks of the community and being appropriately.
And I think also there's a sense, isn't there, in West Yorkshire, and I don't get this so much in Manchester, that in West Yorkshire there's a sense that it's almost a zero-sum game, that if I win, if you win, I've lost. It's not a positive sum game, that if we join in this, then we can all do better. I think in Manchester it tends to be seen, partly because Howard Bernstein ensured that's how it was seen, that we all gain from this.
Perhaps we just need to do a bit of a look back.
That is to be, as a Manchester citizen, I can assure you, if you go to Oldham or Baltimore, Wigan, there is a resentment against the city centre, that the city centre's got all the cream and that they are less.
We do just need to think about what did happen, not without being nostalgic about it, but quite so the relationship between the valleys and the urban. So like the Colne Valley Urban District Council and gritted the roads, but the water came from Huddersfield, the corporation. Actually, Dewsbury Backley's water came from the Home Valley. So there was that sort of relationship. And so it wasn't just, the local authorities, although much more, didn't do everything. It was, Huddersfield ran the bus. The transport was run by the corporation. Split between schooling. Huddersfield ran its own schools, the West Riding was the borough. So,
I'm just aware of time, and I obviously in your position as chair of the allowances panel, it allows us to open up an issue which is often seen as rather thorny, which is that of council remuneration. Council remuneration. I suppose two questions which we sort of raised and asked you to think about. Well, the first is what are your views on how they're remunerated at the moment, and to what extent do you think that approach is working?
Yes. Well, I think it's fair to say that the system works really well. It's absolutely perfect. It couldn't possibly be improved upon.
Right, moving on.
I mean, joking aside, I think it works. Whether it pays enough is a different question, and this is one that the panel has argued about, constantly, and one that we always keep under review. We are, in terms of West Yorkshire, I suppose, at the lower end, but nonetheless, I think the system works because we had a series of sort of basic principles right at the start that we built into the scheme. For example, it should be easy to run and understand. It should be transparent. That there shouldn't be a whole system of bolt-on allowances. There should be a payment. That's what you get. And then we can argue about that. The allowances were built around those role profiles that we talked earlier on about. So I think in its own terms, in terms of its basic principles, I think it works well. Whether it's sufficiently generous or not is a different question. Speaking on behalf of the panel, what the panel has been anxious to avoid is the creation of a cadre of professional councillors. One of the virtues, I think, of the English local government system is that councillors are theoretically part-time. We all know that some are, in fact, full-time. But we built that into it, that it shouldn't be, we shouldn't create professional councillors. And at the time when it was set up, there was strong pressure for it to be professional, full-time paid professional councillors.
Well, I was going to bring you on to Alex Shelbrook's report from last week, where he was suggesting that councillors go full-time, they increase their ward sizes, and that they're paid £37,000 a year. That seems to be growing as a popular idea in Westminster.
Yeah, I think it's deranged. I think the net result of that is that it will erode even further the already weak basis of legitimacy that councillors have in the eyes of the public. And I'm not sure that a professional political class is a good idea. You could argue that one of the reasons why MPs have suffered so much in recent years is, you go to Oxford, you do your PPE degree, you become a SPAD, you get a seat, and that's it. You're an MP. Now, I've got a lot of affection, for the old. Remember the days when people used to laugh at the trade union sponsored MPs. Yeah, but they probably worked 20, 30 years in industry. Yeah, they knew they'd done something else. People used to laugh about the Tory Knights of the Shires, but they were, probably, major landowners and farmers. They probably led men in battle. Not to be sneezed at as skills. People like Dennis Healy or Edward Heath, or with Dennis Skinner, with a huge hinterland. A huge hinterland.
To say the story about Dennis Skinner, I mean, don't agree with his politics, but apparently the day after he was elected, he did his shift down at the pit because he didn't realise he got paid straight away. And that was just so the fact he had been getting his hands dirty right up until the moment.
Well, don't forget, from the Skinner clan, he's the most right-wing one.
Let's move on from there. He gets enough time himself.
The point that Harold Macmillan used to make was that if he lost his seat, then he could always make a living in publishing. Now, I don't like full-time professional political classes. I think they're a bad idea.
So if we accepted the part-time nature, I think that there is always a difference between part-time and amateur. I think that there always has been this sort of sense that because they're part-time they are. There is quite clearly a disaggregation. If councillors are part-time, if we accept that the remuneration is always going to be contentious, but it's as good as it possibly could be in certain context. If we have this issue about efficacy and all these questions about it, how can the council support part-time elected representatives better so that they can perform their roles?
I can't demonstrate this, but I think since the members' allowances panel has been doing its work, I think councillors have become more professional. It's no longer simply a question of turning up to the group meeting, getting your orders, being put on a committee, turning up, voting, and getting paid. Now, I think that's an equally bad system to a professional political class. I think what the members' allowances panel has actually done is, in a sense, it's professionalised or helped to professionalise councillors. What it needs to do now, I think, is to bring together in a much closer way the idea of, well, okay, in the current climate, what does a council need to do this? And we've looked at this tangentially. I mean, for example, we used to have long debates about information technology, and there was, the sort of there was in passing, the idea of the paperless councillor, which it's gone the same way as the paperless office.
Yes.
But now look at how the use that's made of information technology, about how the council operates, about the production of materials that councillors can get access to, and so on and so forth. And I think that's the sort of thing that has to be thought about in terms of the allowances panel from now on, because it comes back to that point that we were making. It's becoming increasingly difficult for a councillor to ring an officer up and say, what's the answer to this? Because the officers are not there. They don't exist. So what we're talking about, I think, is a combination of devolving what central services exist down to ward level, and making it a lot easier for councillors using things like information technology. And don't get me wrong, I don't think information technology is the solution to everything. I'm a BT subscriber, so I know the imperfections of information technology.
The service providers are available.
The service provider. Yeah. So I think in that sense, what we're looking to do at the panel is to think about the role profiles in the light of things like the new council, the Democracy Commission, and so on and so on and so forth, and think about, well, okay, these are the role profiles. This is the environment in which they're now expected to work. How can we continue pushing this professionalisation?
It's quite interesting. We were speaking to Roger Bushell from the Staff College yesterday about changing the narrative report. And he was talking about similar to what he's talking about, a spectrum of engagement from the traditional decision making through to full participation. And it's again this thing we've struggled with as councillors about outcome-based approach. So, I mean, one of the concerns I know our groups represent about the the role profile. If you do this, you do this, you do this, you do this, you're fulfilling the role. But actually, if there's a way of finding, well, what outcomes do we want?
Yes.
How can you most effectively represent your ward? Because actually sometimes it's about saying, we're never going to get that, or if we want to get this, we need to operate.
Well, it's interesting now, because in terms of that two forms of democracy we talked about at the beginning, you could argue that the ward profiles are much more closer to a representative model of what you do, rather than a participatory democracy one. And that the role profile therefore needs to reflect in its content, it needs to reflect that shift away from sort of being a representative to being the participate, to being the key figure in promote, the enabler. Now I think there are elements in that, and I think it may be that they're in the role profiles are in a sort of transitional form. And what we need to be careful of in the independent panel is that we can't run ahead of what the individual councillors think is doable. I mean, there's no point in us saying, right, this is what you're going to do. I mean, I'd be very uncomfortable with that because I'm not elected by anybody. You are. So, and come back to the point. The fact of the election is a critical it's a critical resource, a powerful factor that needs to be taken into account. But, if we can push the role profiles away from a sort of overly representative culture to a more participatory culture, then that could well help. But that does involve support. Otherwise it's just right, get on with the job. Well, Sorry, John.
Thank you. You mentioned there about participatory culture, which is obviously something that would benefit everybody, councillors, citizens, the community at large.
Yeah.
One of the things that's really jumped out to me in the conversation, and we're all guilty of doing it, is in the conversations we've used the word SPAD. We've talked about the Leeds model, the Manchester model.
Blah, blah, blah.
And I'm actually really fighting with myself to not go in the council speak model. So I really do think if I was a member of the public watching this, I'd probably have switched off by now, because I don't think, and that's certainly, I don't mean that offensively towards anyone, but I think it's something that we've really got to be conscious of as council textbook people.
I think that's dead right, because every occupation has its own special language, and unless you've got that language, then you're not part of it.
Yeah.
And if you've got it, then you can close people out.
Yeah.
Now, I think that's dead right, and I agree absolutely. And I think one of the issues that we have in when we talk about politics is that tendency to drop into a specialist language, and it's something that we should struggle to avoid. And I think in the case of this, it's probably even stronger.
Yeah.
The temptation to do it is even stronger.
Absolutely.
Because some of the issues are highly technical. But in the final analysis, the issues are actually quite straightforward. It's about I'll use the word we, but how do we deliver the best level of service that we possibly can to local citizens. I mean, that's what it's basically about.
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
it, and that's it. You don't even need to add on to that. How can we deliver the best services that we possibly can? And if we keep that at the forefront, then I think we've got it. But you're right, the language is awful.
Yeah, sure, maybe have an amnesty about the language we use.
Jargon amnesty.
You do find sorry. In a meeting, for example, I might say to Andrew, that's a great idea, but if it was taken in the chamber of the context, it would be, I welcome Councillor Marchkinson's idea, which that's not how we speak to people, and that's not how we speak on the doorstep, so it's almost this different persona you take on. And I think actually, if somebody knocked on my door, I wouldn't want them to fill me with jargon. I just want to say, vote for me, because I'm going to do this, this and this, or this is what I've done. And I think we will really need to, probably sort of grab on the suckets, but I think we're all guilty of saying, getting zapped back into our own language.
I think we all need to play bullshit bingo.
Yes. Some of us already are. I know. Keep forgetting I'm on camera. We've got about 10 minutes to go. We've drawn your time. You've been very generous. I just want to run through a few quick questions, that's okay with my fellow just to sort of draw on particularly some of the issues which have come up. One of the things which has resonated, and it's sort of linked to the remuneration and to all the other issues we've raised, is how do you attract the next generation of councillors? One of the concerns, of course, is that there is a certain profile of councillors which is both gender and age sensitive and often racially defined as well. Do you have any thoughts on that? Yeah,
it's an interesting one. We, going back a long time, one of the issues that after it had been running for about 5 years, perhaps a little bit longer, the panel was asked to actually consider this question about how the scheme can be used to attract a broader range of councillors. And we had some ideas on this, and with the help of officers and people who were working in that area, we set up we helped set up the the sort of the induction process whereby you could come along, be a councillor for a day sort of thing, find out what it was like. And I think those are valuable, and I think those are obviously necessary. I think it's really, really important that if you're going to join an organisation, it's a good idea to find out what it does, how it works, and so on and so forth. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean, however, that affects the overall makeup of the people that are coming forward. So the question that I suppose we're asking is, well, okay, what's the average councillor look like? So I suppose you're talking, white, male, middle-aged, the usual. How do we get away from that? How do we get away from that? And of course, that's a question that applies not just to local authorities; it's one that applies to all organisations. Interestingly, I suppose you could argue that councillor recruitment is actually easier to change because it's open. All you need are people to come along and say, I'm really interested in becoming a councillor. So what we need to do is to find ways of persuading people from, I don't like using it, but I will, sort of non-standard groups, to think, oh, God, I could do that. I could do that. But how? I will push it back to the groups. Because they are the ones who are in closer and more intimate contact with communities.
So parties in a way have a responsibility.
Yes, I think so.
Yeah,
I think
right.
so. I think the days are gone when you went along to try and join your local Labour Party and you were told, "Oh, I'm sorry, you can't. We're full." This sort of idea, and that you needed to have a certain sort, certain background to be acceptable, to be acceptable as a candidate. Clearly, we're not saying that the body of councillors, the 64 councillors, should be an exact, sort of representation of Kirklees, but it could be a damn sight closer. In terms of ethnicity, religion, gender, whatever. But I think that's essentially a function of political recruitment by the groups. The role of the council then is to ensure that those people who then express an interest get a clear idea of in a sense, what they're letting themselves in for.
Thank you. That's very interesting. Just to finish up on my own, I'm sure there may be some questions from Gemma and from Andrew, but one of the issues which has come up has been the question of electoral turnout for local elections and how you might address that.
Yeah.
A number of solutions have been preferred. I just wonder if we can get your opinion on a range of them. Some people have suggested that there is the introduction of online voting and some using technology more to increase voting. Do you have any opinion on that?
Not really. I think it's incredibly easy to vote now. Short of filling the ballot paper in for the person, I'm not quite sure how it can be made much easier. I mean, I'm a little bit heretical on this. I tend to think if people don't want to vote, fine. If you want them to vote, then you have the Australian model, you have compulsory voting. But I think the question then has to be, well, if people aren't voting in large numbers, well, why? And it goes back to our earlier discussion, is, well, what's the point? If something can be made relevant, then perhaps that's likely to increase turnout. But I'm not that concerned about low levels of turnout. If people don't want to vote, fine, don't.
It is the choice of the democracy.
It's a choice. The choice is, I don't want to vote. I think they're all a load of tosspots. I don't want anything to do with it. And of course that's fine, but then the price that you pay is, well, shut up.
Yeah, you don't have that.
Yeah,
of course. Yeah. There has been suggestions to lower the voting age to 16 for local council elections. Do you think that might have any? The idea of it being habit forming there.
Yeah, sure. No, well, why 16? Why not 14?
It is that arbitrary sense about what 16 is.
I don't know. In my darker moods, I think voting should be increased to 30. The age of 30, and only people with
we still all qualify, so that's all right.
Only people with advanced degrees, a certain level of property, and
yes.
No, I don't know. Fine, yeah. I mean, the evidence is mixed. Clearly, the Scottish evidence from the referendum is that it had a major impact. Perhaps it might be that people will be more likely to engage in voting if they perceive politics as being a more directly relevant activity to what to their own lives. I mean, people don't seem to have any problem voting on the X Factor.
So it's addressing the symptoms rather than the cause.
I think so.
The last question I'd like to ask is one about election cycles, and there has been debate about whether there is maintain the present system 3 and 4 years, or that we move to a all-out election for the 4-year cycle, or Alex Shelbrook's suggestion was that you go to a 5-year cycle. To the extent, have you had any opinion on that?
I think 5 years is too long. I can see the case in terms of national elections, but in terms of local elections, I think what we've got three years is a good one. I did think about applying the system in the United States to House of Representatives elections, where you have a cycle where every 2 years 1/3 of the council is re-elected. The danger with that is that you then become involved in a permanent election campaign, and I think that would then detract from the actual task of governance and getting things done. So I think I wouldn't recommend a change in the number of and the cycle of elections. I think what we've got works well.
Could we just immediately go into that? Because obviously there's an issue about the electoral system. Some of us quite enjoy the elections because it's actually a way of making sure we're doing the engagement we know we should be doing. So actually, if we go to say a system like single transferable vote or a more representative, and politicians are actually appealing to a wider. They can't just attack the opposition. They've got to. Do you think that might work? Every 2-year cycle, election by thirds.
It would become more difficult then.
Right. In what sense?
I think it would become more complex in terms of you as a councillor, for example, thinking, how is this? Who is my opposition going to be, and how would I address this? And should I form an electoral alliance with the Greens to neutralise? I just worry about the.
That's about the electoral system.
It's an interesting one, that.
There's 2 separate issues there about. I think one of the things we've said about with the introduction of single transferable vote in Scotland is that some of the parties are more part of an election campaign. You cannot do that anymore.
No, absolutely.
So from an election point of view, it tends to be more positive. This
it
is
does.
what I stand for.
It does. Yes, and also you could argue that it then makes you think about who you are going to ally with.
That seems to have worked quite well in Scotland. I mean, in England, where we're less used to that, but probably in Scotland, they actually have built up consensuses.
But there's an interesting question there
at a local level.
What about the number of ward councillors? Why not? Well, do we need 3? I'm just throwing this out. If you cut it down to 1, for example, that would immediately end that. That would stop that happening, wouldn't it? Because you'd only be electing 1 ward councillor. That ward councillor would then have to be, all things to all people. Now I know that this is an issue, and we've seen it at national level with cutting the number of MPs down. It's very difficult to do. Even though now the House of Commons, I think the House of Commons now has more MPs than it had in 1914 when Ireland was part of it. So now, if you're thinking about changing the electoral system, do you also then think about changing the number of councillors?
Well, it'd be an opportunity to look at everything.
It would, wouldn't it? Particularly if you're saying, well, these councillors now are going to be doing very different things.
But again, if you look at other parts of the UK, smaller wards, still with 3 representatives. I think Leeds and Kirklees are 2 of the highest numbers of electors per ward in the country.
And that's a not unimportant consideration as well. In talking, when we were talking about bringing politics closer to people. So,
Well, if my fellow commissioners have asked all the questions that come to mind, I'm looking at the time and realise that we've slightly overrun, and also that I have broken the phone convention. Apologies.
That's what conventions are there for.
Well, indeed. Thank you very much for your time this morning.
Not
It's
at all.
been hugely enjoyable.
Yeah,
it's always a good sign that time flies when you enjoy the conversation. I think all three of us have been very grateful for your enthusiasm and ideas, and as I noted when we started, that we see this as a conversation, not as a one-off interaction. So we will be consulting with all our stakeholders and going back and firstly checking that we've captured your ideas accurately and you feel happy that those are represented. But also that as we draw together some conclusions, that we would be very interested to use your experience and as a sounding board and to come back. It's but for now, thank you very much, Andy.
Not at all. Thank you. It's very enjoyable.